Welcome to Paranormal or Reality. On today's video, we explore some ghost stories from around the country that will keep you up at night. Now make sure to like and subscribe for more content like this. Let's begin. Okay, so let me start this by saying that the story will sound a bit too crazy, but I swear many people around the neighbor private street where this happened can confirm most of this was real. I apologize if I am wrong on the grammar, since English is not my first language. The event goes like this. It all happened a couple of years ago to a family that lives exactly on the same private street as my boyfriend's family on Florido area in Tijuana City, Mexico. My boyfriend told me this story once, and my sister-in-law confirmed it recently. It was a common day, I think it was a weekend, on the private street, with all families going on with their normal lives. Some of the kids were playing outside as usual, but most of the people were inside their home as it was getting late already. So my boyfriend's family was in their house resting and watching TV, when suddenly someone knocked at their door. My mother-in-law goes to see who's knocking. There was a family that they knew already, and the mother was asking if her younger child was inside her house, as the family's been looking for him all around their house and the neighborhood, but apparently nobody has seen him. My mother-in-law was a good friend of the lady whose son was missing, so she knew for sure that the lady nor the family could be joking and messing with all the neighbors with something so serious. My mother-in-law said that they have not seen the boy anywhere, so the mother was visibly concerned, thinking that the boy had probably gone further the private street on his own. All the people began to panic since nobody had idea where the boy was, so they gave up and called the police to ask for help. After a couple of minutes, the police arrived to the neighborhood, and they began asking questions to the family before entering the house. Suddenly, everybody around the private street heard a loud boom, like if something so heavy fell to the ground. Apparently, the noise came from inside the house of the family whose youngest child was missing. The mom immediately came inside the house to see what that loud noise was. All that she could see was her small boy on the table with his head laying as he has been asleep over there the whole time. The mother yelled to everybody that her child is over there, so it was big news for the whole neighborhood that the boy was safe and sound. But if everybody from the family was looking for the boy around the entire house and all their neighborhood all around the private street, how is it possible that nobody else saw the boy fallen asleep over the table on the living room in the middle of the house? So after the people were relieved that the boy was apparently just playing hide and seek on his house, so all of them came back to their normal activities and continue with their life. Or, at least, that is what everybody, though, at the time. A couple of weeks later, my mother-in-law receives the visit of the mother of the boy who was missing. And they were talking about normal stuff that neighbors talk when she then remembered what happened that strange day. My mother-in-law decided to ask the lady what exactly happened that day. This is where the real strange part begins. The lady, whose boy was missing that day, said something like this to my mother-in-law, while my sister-in-law was also listening from the inside of the house. It all happened in the living room, which is the first room that you see when you enter the house. My boy was just eating cereal on the table when I told him he should not leave the table until he finishes his cereal. Well, the last thing I saw was my boy barely sleeping over the table when I for a moment had to go upstairs for something that I needed. It didn't take much time for me to come back when I went downstairs, but my boy was no longer on the table. I only could see his plate of cereal. I began calling him and looking all around the house, but there was no sign of him. All of my family began looking for him as well, but again there was no trace of him. We immediately went outside thinking he might have left the house without us noticing, but the thing is that we never heard him open the door, nor the neighbors who were outside saw him leave the house. I was afraid he might have left the neighborhood since it was getting dark, and I didn't want to think someone could have taken him to hurt him or do something worse to him. Just when the police were outside our home, when I heard a loud boom. So I quickly ran to see what the reason of that sound was coming from our home. The only thing that I saw was my child sleeping with his head laying over the table next to his place of cereal, just exactly as he was before I went upstairs. When everybody left, I asked him where he went, and his answer scared me to the death. He said that he was asleep on the table when he woke up and saw the shadow of a tall man wearing a hat right next to him in the corner of the living room. He said the man spoke to him and said something along like lines of, "Do you want me to show you something?" and the man was holding a key that apparently belonged to a box that was under the table. According to my child, he then stands up, approached the tall hat man and took the key from him. When he suddenly woke up, he just saw me waking him up from the table. We have no rational explanation for this, and as I mentioned, my boyfriend's family and the people from the private street can confirm the story. I really wish I could dare to visit the family, or have a talk with the lady whose son was missing, so I hear the story directly from her, or even her son. It's just, I don't really know her, and I wouldn't want them to feel uncomfortable just to remember such a situation. This is my first post on Reddit, but honestly, I don't know where else to talk about it, and it's been weighing on me for years. For some backstory, I, 19F, used to live in Western Australia, Perth, with my mother and my stepfather. This story happened when I was in year 5. I was 10 years old. Moving was rather difficult for me in year 4, new place, new school, new siblings, but finally away from the abuse and torture of my old home. Thankfully, after a year, things got easier. While my mental health was still an issue, I was settling in nicely with this new school. Just a few months before my birthday in year 5, my class and another year 5 class organized an excursion to Fremantle Prison as a history lesson in some sense. While I was nervous because it wasn't a place I was familiar with, I had my friends to lean on if I was overwhelmed. Once we arrived on the bus, the tour guide took us through the old prison. I was honestly amazed at the history and the layout. It was truly rather interesting. Eventually, the guide took us to the second floor. We stopped on the side, as the guide taught us about the safety nets in between the stairs and how it was put in place, because the inmates would attempt to either hurt themselves or others by jumping off the rail guards. As he was talking about it, I subconsciously looked to the side, being the curious 10-year-old I was, down the halls where the cells were. For those who know about Fremantle Prison, you might also know that it's said to be haunted by inmates that had died there in the past. As I looked down the hall, holding my friend's hand because I was overwhelmed by the amount of people, I noticed something. A person. I don't mean just a shadow. A whole person. He was middle-aged, maybe around 45 to 50. He was completely naked except for some white underwear and had a large wound on his head. We stared at each other for a good 10 seconds before he walked into a cell and disappeared from sight. The cell doors were shut. He just phased through the door. I was horrified. I held my friend's hand tighter and shuffled so I was stood behind them. "What's wrong?" they asked, their voice soft and kind like always. I didn't respond. Even if I wanted to, my voice just wouldn't come out. My friend stared at me for a moment before sighing. I'm guessing they assumed I was just a little shaken by the whole inmates committed suicide thing and wrapped their arm around my shoulders, keeping me close. Now I know my mental state back then was shitty, and I had, and still do have, hallucinations due to the trauma I went through. But I genuinely believe that must have been something else. My hallucinations were and never are that detailed anytime I see a person. It's usually just a shadow. This guy looked real. I've never talked about this with anyone, not even my therapist, because honestly, just thinking about it makes me paranoid. However, I needed to get it off my chest. This morning, at around 6:15, I got woken up to what felt like something grabbing or lightly slapping my foot. I have 3 cats, one of which, Leo, loves to attack mine and my wife's feet under the blanket. So my first thought was that it was Leo. However, when I leaned up to check, all 3 of my cats were lying next to me, 2 of them to my left and 1 to my right. Probably about 5 or so seconds later, the cat that was lying to my right jumped up. Like those videos of people putting cucumbers behind cats, and he hissed and jumped off the bed, ran to the other side of the room and just sat there staring at the bed. It kinda creeped me out a bit, but I ended up just getting ready for work and not really thinking much about it. Now earlier today on my lunch break, I called my wife to tell her about it. She had to go into work early, 5 a.m., so she was already home. After telling her, she was pretty freaked out because she said that at about 2 to 3 in the morning, She had what she described as a lucid dream sleep paralysis, where she saw a dark figure pacing back and forth at the edge of our bed. She said she felt like she couldn't move, which is why I said sleep paralysis, but could also be the typical frozen in fear. But when she was able to move, she turned on her phone flashlight and looked around but saw nothing. I somewhat recall waking up and seeing her with the light, but I'm a heavy sleeper, so I did not fully wake up. We were both pretty weirded out by the fact that we both had creepy experiences in the same morning, but not really sure what to make of it since something of this nature has never really happened before. Just to add, my grandmother died when I was about 1 to 2, and according to my father, she was very attached to me. I remember as a kid seeing what I described as colored dust. If you close your eyes really hard and you see that almost colorful TV static stuff, that's what it looked like. It would move around my room in the dark and make somewhat humanoid shapes, and I always just kind of felt like someone was always around me. It scared me sometimes as a kid, but thinking back on it nowadays, I wouldn't consider that stuff scary anymore, especially the colored dust, because I think that was just my eyes doing weird stuff in the pitch black. I would tell my parents about it, and they would always say it was my grandmother watching over me, but as a kid that was quite a confusing concept to grasp, especially since I never really met her considering she died when I was so young. Just thought that that information would be useful to add. Thanks for tuning in. Watch another video if you dare.